This is Speaking of Shakespeare, a series of conversations about all things Shakespearean, with the focus on new digital technologies and also about developments in Shakespearean performance and education across the globe. I'm Thomas Dabbs, recording this introduction from Aoyama Gakuin University in central Tokyo. The following conversation is with Pip Willcox of the National Archives in the United Kingdom. Pip is head of research at the National Archives and has a long and fruitful career, including her contributions to digital scholarship and her prior leadership role at the Center for Digital Scholarship at the University of Oxford. Pip's role in archival research and digital development crosses paths often with students and scholars in Shakespearean studies. Before we begin, I should add that this conversation is sponsored by the Aoyama Vision Initiative at Aoyama Gakuin, and that this series is also funded by a generous grant from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, called Kaken. And this organization, thankfully, includes support for research in the humanities. Hello, Pip. How are you? This is just a joy for me. It is absolutely joyful to see you again. And I know the last time I saw you was the Digitizing the Stage conference in Oxford in the summer of 2019. So how have you been?
Hello, Tom. Happy New Year to you. It's so lovely to see you. 2019 feels like quite a long time ago.
It seems like another era, like the Paleolithic age or some kind of separate era that we lived in. And I don't know about you. I look at people, just anything, a YouTube video or just films or television, and I see people sitting beside each other as audiences in shows or theater or whatnot, and it looks strange now.
Yes, 2 meters. You say 2 meters. Yes, but that was a fantastic conference, wasn't it? What wonderful speakers we had, and we organised it with our lovely friends at the Folger Shakespeare Library with Eric Johnson and his team, and it was a joy. I started organising it before I left my previous job, and they very kindly sort of made space for me in the conference to come back and talk about some of the work that my current, but my colleagues then as well were doing. It was what a lovely time we spent at the Bodleian in Oxford. Beautiful surroundings, beautiful weather. And do you remember we went to the early modern pub in Whiteham for the conference dinner?
Yeah, I have actually an apology from they were serving white wine, and white wine and my metabolism doesn't mix so well. So I was just a little bit disoriented because I never drink white wine. I drink red wine and so forth. And we were at the table, and I think I was doing some impromptu acting about an angry character, maybe in a Shakespeare play, or maybe I was impersonating an angry American Southerner. And I realized that I have reached the age where when I do that, I do it too well. And a couple of people at the table sort of looked at me suspiciously, like, is this guy really like that? And I said, no, it was just an act. I was impersonating a Southern sheriff or something like that as a joke. So if I scared you, I apologize.
Well, they do still talk in Whiteham Village about that time an angry American professor. I had no recollection of that. I'm sure no one else does.
There's just these various places in the world that I go where they say, listen, watch out for this man. He comes out of a 70s movie where he apparently was a highway patrolman or a deputy sheriff somewhere in the South. But anyhow, what really happened to that, it was so relaxing, and there were so many fine personalities there and colorful personalities, and the people and everything that happened, the papers, the camaraderie was just so good. And I really, really miss that. You're in a world where you go, if everything froze, if we actually were living in software like the Matrix and everything froze right here, these are the people I would choose, you know?
We've
These
been so
people.
lucky, haven't we, Tom?
Yeah,
We are so lucky we have this technology. It's not
yeah,
the same as being in a room with you, but it's pretty
yeah,
close. And the people
yeah,
that we've had the opportunity to meet, we've had both of us quite long careers already. And I
yeah,
think you, from everything that you've told me, but I've met such extraordinary, wonderful, kind people, brilliant people.
yeah.
And we carry them with us, even if we are only looking at them in little boxes on our dining room tables, kitchen tables, our desks, what have you.
Yeah. Well, one of the points of this particular program that we're doing here is to try to bring the human element to people who, when we spread out to the world, when people talk about librarians, library scientists working in digital archives and so forth, and we're going to get there, talk about Shakespeare professors or just university professors. Very often when I'm watching a YouTube video or a program where people are being interviewed about this issue or that issue, almost invariably professors are put in their ivory tower. They don't know anything about the world. They're these people who apparently wear ascots and smoke pipes and look down on everyone. And I wanted to, in doing this series, show who we are, who we really are. You know, we are just people who followed something that interested us, and fortunately, we got through. You know, it's not easy, but we got to do things that we love. And I wanted to ask you about your work now, and even the physical environment. Are you at home right now, or are okay? So no, you do not go to the office?
No, so my team and I, the team I work in, we haven't been at work since March. There was one day when one of my colleagues went in. We were hosting an event, an annual digital lecture with the brilliant Carly Kind, who's director of the Ada Lovelace Institute. And my wonderful colleague, we had so many contingency plans in place, but one of the things that we didn't have a contingency plan for and made one up on the day, because she's fantastic, was that the internet went down.
Oh,
Completely. Her service provider had a just complete loss of service, and that happened. She realized when she woke up. She left it till about 10 o'clock in the morning. This is Louise Seaward, who's just a fantastic colleague of mine, and so she dropped us an email to say, so I'm going to go into the office. Fortunately, lockdown was not at its height then, so yes, we went ahead with it. It was fine. What we didn't know, and part of me is horrified and part of me is so grateful to Carly Kind, our speaker, is that she was in the same broadband service unit. She'd
oh,
also lost internet, and it came on quarter of an hour before she was due to join us. She was at the point of leaving. So yes, other than that one occasion, our whole team has been working from home since March, which in some respects feels as though it's been most of our lives, and in other respects feels as though it's only been a few weeks, because apart from the seasons, apart from watching the leaves fall off the tree outside, it yes, there's an odd sort of concertinaing effect of time. Sometimes it feels fully stretched out,
yeah.
sometimes it's squashed into a tiny space. But yes, and as things stand in the UK, I think probably we might review that again in March. But that's just our team at the National Archives. We have been able, my colleagues have just been extraordinary. Some of the collections are on site, many of them are on site. So of course we have security there, and our brilliant cleaning staff have stayed there throughout and are just the completely sort of unsung heroes of this. It's the people who keep us all safe. So that we've had other people in various departments where people need to be on site. Some people have come in, but with far reduced numbers. And then we open to the public again in a limited way, obviously with social distancing. So we have been open for quite a while, fitting in as many people as possible into the space that we have, keeping everybody, them and us, safe. And now we're closed again because we're in another national lockdown. It's not deemed safe. So yes, it's been an up and down year, but we are so lucky to be able to do our work completely from home. And actually in our team, we went pretty seamlessly online. Yeah, there's been the odd hiccup, but they've been very minor hiccups and nothing that couldn't be sorted out with a bit more equipment being sent home, like a monitor, for example. And everything was online already. So even I think the National Archives has done a brilliant job of going online, but in our team, it really doesn't deserve any. I mean, it just happened. We were pretty much working that way already. So what we did do was put in lots more meetings so that we could catch up, because we're a really close-knit team. And at the beginning, we were meeting half an hour every morning to check in, and half an hour in the evening to drink tea, talk nonsense. That's cut down a bit. We quite a lot actually, but we still meet most mornings and check in. And there's always does anyone need any help with anything stage? And of course, we have many meetings throughout the day. So I don't know if it's the same with you. We seem to spend most of our lives in video conferencing calls. But how is it with you? Is this your office? Are you
This
in
is
work?
yes, this is my office. This is my office, and we can come to work. We've had a spike recently, but there is a semi-functionality. We are teaching. All teaching is online. I finished a meeting. I'm in my evening. You're in your morning. But we had a faculty meeting today that was all online. A couple of my colleagues were here, but we do not gather together. There's the social distancing, which is kind of natural. It comes very natural. And of course, masking is de rigueur. It's fashion. And I left, was it this morning? I think I left this morning and got into the elevator where I live, and I was going down, and I'm thinking, I always forget something, and it doesn't occur to me until I'm down on the first floor that I've forgotten my wallet or something, like that. And I'd forgotten my mask. And so I had to go right back up, and go in and get my mask. It's just as essential as a wallet would be, or anything. So that's the way it is. But we really are in a state of not knowing. We are finishing up a term online and looking toward and the Japanese system is a bit different from the rest of the world, really, in that we start our year in April. So we had some discussion today, in fact, about how we might manage a hybrid situation in class, or all online or not. And there's just a lot of not knowing. And but anyhow, I wanted you to know that when I introduced you before we got together here, I made it abundantly clear that you are Director of Research at National Archives in the United Kingdom. And that is to me, I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed with that. And
It
I
is an
noticed
amazing job, and I love it. But Tom, I'm head of research. We have a director of research and collections. That's Val Johnson.
I think that in our conversations before that you have indicated very strongly that you're very happy with things as they are at the National Archives. And I received a very nice email from one of your colleagues today who sent me some images, and I believe Liz
Fulton,
yeah, Liz Fulton.
Yes.
And so we exchanged very polite emails, and I explained how we will be very protective of these images that are, of course, protected under a kind of copyright, or their archival material. So it's very special, and we're going to look at that in a moment. But I wanted to ask you about the National Archives. I know the setup at the Western Wing and the Bodleian, where in the new Bodleian, as opposed to the old Bodleian, which was a little bit forbidding. If you were a 23-year-old graduate student seeking to study the the Marlowe collection of Edmund Malone in the 18th century, people in the front could be very officious, and once you got in, everybody was extremely helpful, as they are now. But the Western Wing allows this large foyer. It shouldn't even be called a foyer. It's a great room in a way of collections and things that the public can walk in and feel a part of. And exhibitions and a coffee shop and all of that. And I wonder if at the archives, I saw the picture that was sent to me. I've never been there. And can you do the same sort of thing at the archives if you visit?
Absolutely. So it's open to the public. Part of the National Archives is a unit that used to be called the Public Records Office, and they are public records. They belong to the Crown because they're so the UK. The National Archives in the UK is the official archive and publisher of the UK government, also in England and Wales. We have some devolved governments here, as you know. And so, yeah, my colleagues, look after those collections for the public and for government as well. We're a non-ministerial government department too. So all sorts of people need access to them or want access to them. And yes, members of the public can come in. We have a similar large space. It's a different period of building, the National Archives at Kew, which is just outside London, to the west of London, just up the road from Kew Gardens. That I still have a fair few people who believe I work at Kew Gardens because they know I work in Kew, which would be lovely, but I don't.
It's not in the garden area, but it's located nearby.
Exactly. A few minutes walk away. Yes, Kew is an area. It's not just a garden. Yes. Yes. So yes, the public is welcome to come in. Anyone can come in. The gatekeepers are not perhaps quite so fierce as you came across at the Bodleian back in the day, when you were first dipping a toe into Malone's library. Yes, so anyone can come in. Obviously, you need a ticket, but that's very straightforward to get. And we also have a big cafe, and the space can be cleared and used for other things. Quite a big space upstairs as well, which is where the reading rooms are too, a big sort of central social space. And there's an exhibition space as well, which is similar to the Western Library, but part of the Bodleian in Oxford. Yes, it's one of the sadnesses that obviously at the moment, the building is closed to the public because of lockdown, but of course the exhibitions aren't on, and an exhibition had just opened when we closed to the public, or closed for lockdown in March in 2020, and I just heard yesterday that it's gone online. So they've put a huge amount of effort into taking this wonderful exhibition called With Love, and they've taken it online. Love letters over 500 years or so that are in our collection. It's an extraordinary collection. I think people might assume it's just the census, or just things that on the surface look like box ticking government records, but it's huge and vast and far more diverse than I have any idea about. About every other day someone tells me something that's in the collection. I think, really? That's amazing. It's
what a wonderful
millions,
idea.
11 million government records, I think. Things, photographs and posters and designs and
love
recipes
letters.
and love letters.
Love letters. What a great place to start with love. What a great place to start. And the title of and this is open access now, you're saying that whatever, is that right? You can.
Yes, that exhibition is online, and the curator of it, Vicky Igelkowski-Broad, there's a lovely little YouTube video. Sorry, little as in it's short. It won't take people much time to watch, but she talks through some highlights of the exhibition, and you can explore more of it.
Well, I'm going to watch that after we finish. In fact, that's delightful, and it's entitled With Love. All right, so I'm thinking in Google world, if I went into Google search and said With Love National Archives UK, probably I would get the link and could explore. That is wonderful. I remember, the poet Hart Crane, the American poet, has a wonderful poem about letters, grandmothers' letters and love letters and things like that. And it's something when people find things like this when unfortunately when their parents pass away or a loved one pass away, and they are involved in cleaning up the house, and they just find in a little box these things that are really private, but after the person has passed, become something that you feel that you can get in touch with the loved one, but also with anyone. You feel like the human connection so strongly. And I'm wondering if we're going to be left with a bunch of angry responses to Instagram or Twitter or Facebook threads where, you know, I'm very careful what I put out there, because these things survive, and they, you know, we're not there now, but the technology will be there where you could search out one of us 150 years from now. And I don't want people seeing me angry. I would rather them find a very private love letter, because it wouldn't matter then, right? And that puts us so much in touch. Now, the records at the National Archives, I've noticed from your website, you guys have graciously and thankfully made available for open access viewing a number of things during the pandemic, and I guess this is one of them. And is there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. People across the archives in all different departments, you know, the bits that probably people, most of us, don't think of most of the time when we think of large institutions, but people have done a huge amount of work to take all the services that we offer online. So, for example, my colleagues in education and outreach have done a huge amount, because so many people have been homeschooling, and they have something called Time Travel TV to help people with their history. We've taken training online, and actually there've been some benefits of that, because before we offered training to people who could come, training in working in the archives, to people who could come physically to Kew, but with a lot of work behind the scenes, able to offer it to anyone, sort of, you know, to make it available to anyone anywhere in the world to come. You know, it's not an unlimited resource, because you still have to have a Zoom call or similar, with enough people not so many people in the room that they can't ask questions. It's still a training session, but we are able to offer those things online. And my amazing colleagues in a team led by Catherine Elliott have managed to get so many of our images online and freely available to the public, and the response has been absolutely enormous. People have hugely rightly taken advantage of that opportunity. The number of downloads that we've had, because things were available, but they were available for a small fee. Conversations are ongoing about what will happen after this. As you say, we hope the pandemic will end one day, maybe quite soon. But yes, it has been tremendously well received. Obviously, people are disappointed that they haven't been able to visit in person. And some of the things, I mean, you love your books as well. Sometimes it's the materiality of the records, of the documents that you need to see. We have experts on hand still online to help people, but it's not the same as being able to talk to an expert at a desk looking at the document in front of you. But yeah, doing the best we can, and clearly people are making the most of it and enjoying the access that they do have, limited as it is.
Yeah, well, we have a small special collections at my university, and we're making the effort. We are a lemonade stand compared to the collections at the archives, of course, but we have some very fine Bibles. We have some we have several very, very nice editions that we're now digitizing and putting online and sharing with the Folger. And one of the two or three main points I wanted to make in this particular conversation is the fact that most people, and this includes scholars, and I'll talk about scholars and non-scholars just a moment, in just a moment, but most people in the world do not live near these wonderful institutions like the National Archives, like the Bodleian, like the Folger, and so forth. And so the more that goes online, the more a scholar in India, I get contacted by scholars all over the world now, but in Malaysia or in Enid, Oklahoma, or they might live just a little bit distance from these areas in the UK. This for people who remember having to do scholarship and getting paper cuts, going through card catalogs, and realizing that what you absolutely needed the most, that book was just not available. That, if the Bodleian were across the street, you'd be fine. If the National Archives, if you're a historian or a, a English lit professor, there are so many things that segue into your research. But I had one quick story about doing research. I haven't researched your place yet, but I did research at the Metropolitan Archives in London. And I walked in, and there's this little lunchroom with lockers, and it was very workaday. You felt like, oh, they're regular people here. And I found something that was very, very, very important. It was a print of, it was actually the Vischer print of the City of London that they have there. And they brought it out for me and showed it to me. And I got to spend a long time looking at if it's not the original, it was an engraving. So everything is a reproduction, but it was a very close to the time of the engraving, and you could see all the detail and so forth. And in fact, in the afternoons, a gentleman came up to me and said, "What are you doing with this?" I said, I asked for it and they gave it to me. He goes, "I don't think you're supposed to." So that happened. But during lunchtime, I went in to have I had a little box lunch, and there were these normal people, some pensioners, some guys that they just looked like normal people. They were spending the day at the Metropolitan Archives. And a lot of them, I think, were doing family research or research into their parish church or that sort of thing. So I don't know if the general public, I know these people did, but the general public doesn't understand how much fun one can have looking through archives, even if you're not a scholar. But I did want to ask you, if someone like me who had a scholarly interest came in, I'd probably have to have a little letter from a colleague saying, this guy is not, he, even though he's notorious at that place in Oxfordshire, he's actually a pretty good guy. Just don't feed him any, don't let him drink any white wine. And but is that the way it would be like at the Oxford, where you would come in with a letter of recommendation? And
so I believe you come in with identification. So we,
yes.
having proof of identification, you're then able to call up anything. Things are slightly different at the moment. We ask you to order things up in advance, and documents are quarantined after they've been handled by one person for a little while. But these are current sort of special conditions for obvious reasons. And then many people come in, and I think increasingly it's not necessarily meaningful to draw a distinction between the scholars and the general public. I mean, I like your idea that they look like normal people. Well, which of us doesn't? I think I'm almost normal myself. But people have some people have job titles that suggest that their main job is research. Though I know a lot of university professors who'd say there's a fair amount of admin as well as the teaching and so on. But many people, many of our leading experts on things aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily come from university researchers or college professors, and aren't necessarily professional historians. Obviously, there's another group of people who are hugely learned, who write, who make their living writing about history or addressing history to public audiences through many means, often television, but not only that. But you can be a world-leading expert or a really, really knowledgeable volunteer on a number of projects, and bring expertise which is completely unknown in the academy, and often doing research into parts of our past which aren't so well studied. So it's a delight to be able to work with any and all people who are interested in our collections for any number of reasons. Some of them very personal, some of them practical, as well as looking at the more distant past and tracing, for example, your family through it. It's a very popular tradition there of genealogy.
Yeah, and I feel like a normal person too, but I do feel a little bit separate from a guy who may have had a career as a public servant And like my father is interested in genealogy, and my father spent quite a long time looking into our family genealogy. Of course, it's an endless matter of interest for all of us. Americans, of course, want to try to figure out where they came from, you know. And I, in fact, asked my father, I said, did we descend from some great family, you know, in England or something like that? He said, we were one step ahead of the sheriff, or the sheriff put us on the boat. That's, I'll never forget that. And and we did well after that. But so what I would like to do is segue a little bit into uh, bearing the fact that we are all normal. Some of us normal folks went into literary studies and Shakespearean studies, and I know you studied Anglo-Saxon. We're going to get to that in a moment, and I have a few questions to ask you about Beowulf, but to
Crikey.
to go to the Shakespeare uh, part, and I put this in the introduction also, is that uh, what we do not sometimes, even in field in our discipline, recognize the unsung heroes of what is made available to us in library science, in digital collections, in digital development. We just don't know who those people are. And I've had the pleasure being a part of the digital humanities community to meet you and to meet many other people. The list of names goes on of just these delightful people who are working on these projects that are scale projects. So they're not focused on Shakespeare, but they help us because Shakespeare's there. And so you sent right before we began some images of Shakespeare that are held by the National Archives. And one of them is it just starts with pro. We're not really sure. It's this detective story, a Shakespeare a picture that was found in Vienna, and it was purchased by a gentleman in Paris who gave it to the Royal Shakespeare Company, I believe,
Was that Venice rather than
yeah,
Vienna?
did I
Is
say
that the
Vienna?
one?
Oh,
I think you
Venice.
did.
It was Venice, like Merchant of Venice. You know, same thing.
Someplace in Europe begins with a V.
Venice. It was found, let me start over. It was found in Venice, which of course was one of the focuses of Shakespeare's drama and so forth.
Yeah.
And it was a place where there was a group of Catholic, it was a sort of Catholic stronghold. I think of maybe some expatriates. I'm not sure about this history, but both Johnson and Shakespeare may have been or suspected of being Catholic sympathizers. And, you know, I have looked into this myself, you know, the the idea that during the Reformation, the curtain didn't just drop. You know, if you were there, your grandparents worshipped in whatever they thought was the Christian church, was what we would call the Catholic Church. It's an interesting topic of conversation, though, how this print showed up. And of course, it is more a testimony to the reception of Shakespeare, because apparently it doesn't have much to do with the Shakespearean age, but it was done maybe in the later 17th, 18th century. And it shows how enduring the need to find an image of Shakespeare was through the centuries and continues to be, right? Uh,
Yes.
yeah. And there's another image of the Shakespeare and his contemporaries from 1906 that I think was I'm not sure of the history of that, but it's Stationers Hall, I believe, was where it came from. But it's still a mystery to me, the movement of Stationers Hall, and I need to do more research on that. But these are really
Me
interesting.
too, because we hold some of their records, but not all of them. I know Stations will still
Yeah,
hold some of their own, and
yeah, like
they've been
there's,
kind enough to welcome me there years ago now on another project I worked on their
yeah,
Stations Register. But yes, I don't know about that one. I know a very little bit about the Venice one, that, as you say, was probably two portraits mashed together. There's just this
yeah,
desire, isn't there, to find anyone in approximately the right age of dress with a high forehead, any man
yeah,
with a high forehead, and say, no, that's definitely Shakespeare.
yeah. But it does look like Shakespeare, right?
It does look,
Even though we don't
in as
really
much as we
know
know what he
precisely.
looks like
Yeah,
from
right.
one engraving and one bust,
Right.
yes, made after his death, both of them. But for people who knew what he looked like, yes.
Uh,
Sorry, I should be
no,
more. Yes, it's definitely
it's
him.
eternally interesting. It's eternally interesting to me, but to a lot of people, the history of this this thing that survived the Shakespearean period, that became something, I think, way far more than the actual Shakespeare or any of those people around uh, ever thought it would be. You know, the
Yeah.
afterlife reception and its sort of explosion over time, and it's just still going. Uh,
Yeah, time and space.
Time and
He
space.
had such an eye for a story. We know they
Yes,
weren't all his to begin with. He borrowed them as well, and everyone's been borrowing them since. But
yes,
it's almost extraordinary. Oh, it is extraordinary that it's almost unbelievable. I think that one human could have written so much that's touched so many people, and we know that writing was only one of his jobs. He seemed to be very good at a fair few others,
yeah,
business owner and acting and so on and so on. Yes, and I think that need to find something to look on a human being who looks more or less like us, and think how did that come from this one person. There is that need to humanize while wondering at it, because the stories are just amazing. And the plays are beautiful, but the way they've been adapted into ballet, pictures, photography, plays, films, and any number of borrowings of the stories. Yes, there was yes, people need to find a connection with the human who started the ball rolling.
well, there's a sort of joke, I mean, among some of us about the what was the word, bardolodry, that began really in the 18th century, and the continuing iconic Shakespeare that has become attached with all things academic and Ascot and Pipe and Ivy Tower, that sort of thing. But you get into the reading of the plays, and it's there. It is there. And recently, I interviewed Alexa Jobin, who grew up in Taiwan, and she encountered Shakespeare through Charles Lamb's Tales of Shakespeare. And you have moved from the 16th century to essentially a kind of London-centered thing, and you're all over the world. And in affecting the courses of people's lives, it changes lives. And we're going to talk about your life in just a moment. But I did want to mention that I did look into your collections, and I have really, after that Oxford conference, I took a much greater interest in the National Archives. And you do have Chancery court records. They're not open access, but they're the Chancery Court
Yeah.
for people who are experts. And I'm not one of them. I'm kind of okay, but Chancery courts were an odd sort of thing, and we don't have that type of business now. But that's where you you kind of would go in and say, you know, this man stole two of my pigs, and I want my pigs back, and it's either that or we're going to have to fight for it. And you know, these sort of settlements that were sort of a little independent of common law, where you could
Yeah.
make a plea for certain things. And the
So
16th century records and the trial scenes that are sort of impromptu trials, like the Merchant of Venice where they have the trial of Shylock, which I don't know, it may or may not have followed the proper court protocol, but it looks to me to be more reflective of a kind of Chancery trial, minus the fact that they would allow someone to take a pound of flesh, right, in the end.
And they didn't, thanks to Portia.
They didn't. But we knew they
yes,
wouldn't.
Spoiler alert, it doesn't end that way.
Fortunately.
Absolutely, that would be, yes, that would be a different play. So I am no expert on these at all, as you can imagine, but I was chatting about these to a colleague, a friend of mine, Neil Johnston, who is an expert in these. He and Amanda Bevan, and Amanda in particular, this is her area, have done a huge amount of work trying to make these records more accessible. He says, and here's a top tip for anybody who's interested in researching this area, that it's vastly understudied and enormously rich.
Yeah.
This was a new sort of court that was set up under Elizabeth I.
Yeah.
He tells me, and it was to give normal people, it cost, but to give access to royal justice to anyone who had a complaint. So things that didn't have precedent in law, you would go with a particular complaint and put your case, and then evidence would be gathered. And they're not, I think it's not straightforward to research through them until you're familiar, because the records pertaining to one case aren't all in the same place. They're in several, in several different parts of the case are kept separately, so it can be quite hard to find. But there are there's lots of help online, and there's lots of help that my colleagues can give. But they have the voices of so many people who otherwise might be lost to the record, because they'll get sworn statements from people, interrogatories they're called, where people ask questions and then answer on the record, and evidence is sought, so you can find all kinds of things about life at that period, and it runs through to the 19th century, so it's a long period. But people have done amazing work on this around the theatres in London, and Shakespeare in particular. Someone's been doing work into Shakespeare's father, and it found evidence of him and his business dealings in there as well. Fines paid by fines that were being paid off by him, license fees as well are in there for the theatres. There's all sorts, and they just aren't that studied. You do, you have to put a fair amount of work into learning a new hand to be able to read these records. But once you've got your eye in, and there's plenty of help that people can find online to that, yes, the records are fantastic. The reason they're not available is that they haven't been imaged, most of them. So some of them, the indexes and some of the decrees, which are the judgments, are available on a website that doesn't belong to us. It's called the Anglo-American Legal Tradition. And it's got a fantastic amount of fantastic number of images of these pages. It's not perhaps the easiest to navigate around, and you'll need to do it sort of cross-referenced with our catalogue that Amanda Bevan and colleagues have put a huge amount of work into making much more friendly for users, with much more information in there. But yes, it is an extraordinary collection, and there we are. Neil Johnston says, go and do research into it when times permit.
Well, this is a lesson for any young scholar, young Shakespearean or another young scholar who hears what I heard from the public and even within the profession. It's just been done. It was, essentially it was finished by about 1910, and everybody else has been talking about theoretical matters. And I'm going, no, that's not what I've seen. I've seen a lot of work since then. And I was at a conference a few years ago that was sponsored by Andy Kesson at Roehampton. It was such a delightful summer conference where, again, we had the people you wanted to be in the matrix with. It's just delightful all the way through. And the American scholar who was at the University of Michigan, Bill Ingram, part of his talk, he was a plenary, and part of his talk was basically, he said, I was told this, and he's on in years now, and even then he was told, yeah, it's pretty much been done. And then he found these records office, and I can't remember precisely what it was, but he made his way to London, and he got in there and he goes, this is all new. He was very old, but it's all new. There's an entire career. And his message to the younger scholars there, you find that archive and you'll find that there are just pages and pages and of records and so forth that, we've barely begun, and as we develop, as we do get them imaged, and as we do get more sophisticated in digital search technology, we're pretty good now, but we're going to get better.
Yeah.
And they're just these treasures there that are somewhere in the National Archives also. And yeah, those Chancery Court records are a good
Absolutely.
example. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And one hears, oh, that's been so studied. I have some sympathy with the idea that Shakespeare has been a lot studied, and perhaps to the exclusion of other things that we could study. And there are all sorts of challenges to the canon that we teach and that we learn, for very good reason. And with those views, I'm very sympathetic. With the, oh, don't you worry, young scholar, I've been here and I've done it all and there's nothing for you to see, the complete opposite of what you were just saying. But
Yeah.
one hears that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What nonsense, what nonsense. There are so many archives still to discover, and it's one of the things that I find enormously exciting, that often working so hand in hand, side by side with the brilliant people who work in archives, who know the records really well. It's not their job to sit and read. Then they have a different job from that of researcher, but they know their collection so well, even some that haven't been catalogued yet. But certainly they can help people interpret them and point them in the right direction, in that, as a partnership. There is so much to discover. And a small plea that when you do discover something, please don't say we found it in a dusty archive. They're very rarely dusty. And this was completely unknown. And you think, well, apart from the centuries of people who have been curating it, cataloguing it, and told you which box to look in, but apart from that, it was entirely unknown. Yes, I do understand the excitement. The excitement is still there, though. But also, even if someone has read it and written about it before, we know from looking at the plays and taking a literary approach to them rather than situating them historically, everyone has a new interpretation. Every different generation, half generation, will bring a completely different worldview to it, and that's the richness of studying literature. That it doesn't just take you to the time it was written in imaginatively. You also bring your time to it, and you co-construct, you co-create a story anew every time you every time you stage a play, every time you read a book. You change all the time. The society has changed all the time around you. There is so much more that can be said and that can be challenged.
Well, we've been talking about records, but I think there is an enormous collection of maps, and probably, and I think I read that you have some maps.
Oh, huge!
Yes,
I think it's
huge.
the second biggest hand-drawn map collection in the world. It's
Yes,
vast, absolutely vast.
hand-drawn maps. Okay, so that segues into archaeology and history. That goes into other fields other than people who are, say, primarily historians, or maybe literary critics who got off the path a little bit and want to do some cultural history, like the guy who's talking to you now. I just get very interested in the archaeology of particularly London during the 16th century, obviously. But those things too, that are cross-disciplinary and are applicable to a number of areas. Number one, people probably just want to know what the building looked like. Where was it? We were talking about the Stationers' Hall. I'm sure someone out there kind of knows this, but it's still a mystery to me how it went from Old St. Paul's. Well, when you came in through the west door, it was over at Peter College, that had once belonged to the Roman Church, but was, repurposed and was apparently very grand, right? But I remember staying close to the cathedral in a hotel and looking out the window and seeing a building that said Stationers Hall. And I didn't drum up the courage to walk in the door. Sometimes I do. And I've been greeted very officiously, as I've told you before. I've driven into, in fact, when I was a college student, I hired a car with my colleagues. You know, we're 20, 21 years old. And I was doing some research on T.S. Eliot, and I heard that he had a maybe kind of short stint at a public school, where the town in between Oxford and London. There's the, I want to say, uh, it'll come to me. But anyway, I drove straight there. There's no Google or navigational anything. I just looked on a map, and I drove straight into the quad in the middle. And really, there was a little bit of fuss about that. Like a few men came out there and said, "Well, what are you doing here? You can't park here." And I said, "Well, I'm a student in the States, and I'm doing research on T.S. Eliot, and I would just, I understand that he taught here." And he said, "Well, come in and have tea." It's just immediate turnaround. And they introduced us to an accountant in town who had been taught by T.S. Eliot. And they called him. This was maybe a Tuesday, and it's this afternoon, and said, "We have a couple of students from the States, and they want to ask you about T.S. Eliot." And he said, "Tell them to come by." And we got more tea. And he sat and talked with us for an hour, about what T.S. Eliot was like. It was just wonderful. But anyway, walking into places, people are very shy to do that. And I have been sometimes and have not been sometimes. But I think that's one of the points I wanted to make, that the National Archives is a place you can walk right into. It belongs to the public. It's there for you. And I'm certain there are a host of librarians who will help you in any possible way they can.
And archivists, Tom. Yes.
And archivist. Archivist. I'm
Yes.
thinking more of a library, but this is an archive. I'm sorry. That's very much, there's a difference there. And archivists who are, in fact, specialists in the collections, yes, and knowing where everything is, which is a lot to know. And
it really is. And we have specialists in all periods. So our records start, I think someone told me actually they go a bit before this, but our earliest famous one is the Doomsday book from 1086.
Yeah.
And our most recent will probably have been captured today because we look after the UK government web archive. So it's, it really runs the gamut, and it's everything, because government, it's the record of government, and government touches most areas of our lives. Yeah. So sometimes it takes some digging to get to the human stories, but there are so many human stories in there. And I think exhibitions like Vicky's that we talked about earlier, the With Love exhibition, is a brilliant example of that, but there are many, many others. Yeah, wherever government crosses people's paths.
Before I forget, Shakespeare's Will.
Oh, we have Shakespeare's.
That's a big one.
Will.
We probably should have. That's my fault. I should have brought that up first. Shakespeare's Will.
And that wasn't your job, Tom. That was mine. I should have brought up. Yes, which he signed in 3 places, because I believe we don't have autographs, his own handwriting of his plays or poems. We do have, I think, 6 signatures, and 3 of them are on his will, which is at the National Archives. And the text of it's available on our website and in other places as well, so you can read what he left to whom, and what conditions were attached. Yes.
Just that would be enough to bring a Shakespearean over, just to see it. Is something. It puts you in touch with things that are. To see the physical object is good. It's good to be able to see it online, but
yes,
there's nothing like seeing the physical object. Even if it's under glass or whatever, protected, which. In many cases you have to do because they're so delicate.
And because some things people want to see because they're famous rather than they necessarily have a research question. And one of the things that we do in archives and libraries is look after the collections for the future, and not at the expense of people being able to access them now, but there are some collections which, having been digitized, you would need a very particular reason to see the original, because otherwise it would be seen and handled so much, it would be damaged and it wouldn't be there for future generations.
Yeah. Well, Pip, what I want to do now is I want to look into the formation of Pip as a research archivist. Are you're I was told by a librarian in the States, she goes, you understand, I do library science. And she does very much, because she's very much into the digital, you know, kind of, I don't know if we call it a revolution. Some people think it's over and done with, actually. You know, oh, you guys have already
I think
answered.
we're just
No,
beginning.
this is this is not started really. You know, we're in the almost the prehistoric period of what's going to happen, right? Where you'll just have access
Yes.
pretty much to everything, but it's slow. It's slow because we don't have the power of a major tech company and the billions of dollars and the staff and all of this. It's a lot of work is done almost, you could say, volunteer. Sometimes it's done for the love of it. And is, you know, I'm sure right now, you know, that everybody in the National Archives would love to hire an army of trained, trustworthy professionals to put as much as they could out there available for, at least for viewing, if not downloading, you know. And there's certain things that you do have to protect, even digitally. I understand that too. You studied Anglo-Saxon and you thought enough of that to put that on your webpage at the National Archives. That
Gosh, did I really?
you did. You
I
did.
did. I
And I
should
saw
read what.
that and I zeroed in on it. I said, Anglo-Saxon. Guess who else studied Anglo-Saxon a bit in graduate
Was
school?
that you?
That would be me.
Tom, I didn't.
I
I
had to.
didn't know we had Old English in common. I was lucky enough to go to the University of Leicester for my undergraduate, and I had a whole host of amazing tutors and lecturers, but in particular Greg Walker and Elaine Trahan, both of them
Yeah.
still doing amazing work, one in Edinburgh now and one at Stanford in the States.
Yeah.
And they just their passion and enthusiasm and their brilliant teaching as more than the research. When you're an undergraduate, I think you only come more slowly perhaps to the research that your lecturers are doing. It's that general introduction that they give in, you know, even to first year undergraduates, and then you get deeper into it as you go. But they just made me fall in love with the medieval period, the later and the earlier, and also introduced me to the materiality and the joy of that. And Elaine did a brilliant course on editing, which was I think perhaps more people teach editing now, but it was very unusual then back in the day, a billion years ago, whenever I was an undergraduate. And that bringing together of the content of the of the literature, of whatever's in a manuscript, with the physicality of it, with the materiality of it, the opportunity to hold things, to handle things that have been made by hand and passed through all those hands, it's just extraordinary. And that's what made me fall in love with it. So yes, I went on to study Old English at Nottingham for a year, and made my way from that to other later medieval, and then accidentally ended up in the early modern period in a job at the Bodleian, working on early English books online text creation partnership. So that was my first introduction really to print, which I've been a bit sniffy about, if I'm honest, because I just no, that's not fair. I loved manuscripts so much because they're, you know, quite literally made by hand, and I love it when you find a mistake that a scribe makes, because they make them so rarely. They're absolutely brilliant professional medieval scribes, much better at transcribing than I am when I have to copy something. But all the things in the margins and the things that people draw, and the wine stain where someone's put a cup, you see the life of the book and the lives of the people who have touched that book come through. And I just hadn't come across so many printed books at that stage. And now, of course, as you know, I'm passionate about early printing as well. Not just early printing, but hand printing, letterpress printing. It's wonderful. And yes, I was part of this amazing project. You mentioned earlier projects that do things at scale, so they don't dig deep into something, but they just make it available. And it was a project that took images that had been digitized from microfilm, so not the quality of images that we take now, but legible, perfectly legible.
Yeah. And we're talking about EBO now, or
yes,
yes,
early English
EBO,
books
the
online.
early
Yes.
EBO, early English books online for those out there who there's a history. EBO itself is a historic sort of digital project. It was very early on, but yeah, go ahead. They were taking the manuscripts.
Absolutely.
University of Michigan, I believe, was
That's
the
right.
name.
Yes. So it was Chadwick Healy, a publisher, and then which got bought by ProQuest, who made the images available in the 90s. And this group of people, I wasn't involved at the time, from Michigan and Oxford, thought it would be a good idea to try to extract the text from this, because even now optical character recognition, OCR, is a bit iffy with early books. It's getting better all the time, but it's and there are fantastic projects looking at it and looking at handwriting too, doing amazing things like the Transcribus project out of University College London, and UCL was part of it, but out of the European funded READ project. So it's getting better, but certainly in the 90s and still now to an extent, it's not as good as people at recognizing patterns, recognizing words and transcribing them. So this was a fantastic project that got the text out of all of these books and encoded it using text encoding initiative markup to make them interoperable, sort of searchable across. And it's still this fantastic resource which you can use through the ProQuest site or several others, in fact, now to just using it like an index, doing a free text search, as you might in a Word document you'd written yourself. Or you can take the texts at scale that have been marked up and do comparisons right across them and dig into them sort of computationally by taking the whole, all of them all together. There were, I think, was it 25,000 that were made freely available in 2015, and the rest of them were made available in 2020. I'm guessing there's something like 70,000 early modern texts, early printed texts.
I think that's very accurate. And there was also, you could get access to the PDFs, but not to the text encoding. So with PDFs, of course, you couldn't do the search function where you see a word and you want to see if this word or this idea presents itself again. And I think our history begins in 2013 at the EBO conference in Oxford that you put together. And I think that's when I first met you.
Yeah.
And John Yamamoto Wilson and Angela Davenport, from two of us who were in Japan at the time, we were desperate to have access. We were all working on projects that would have been extraordinarily enhanced with easy access to EBO, and we couldn't get it. So that's where it started. We went there, and then I think at one point you came over to Japan and talked about, I think this was after we managed to get it. Basically, we banged the drum a little bit with some other people. I'm not going to give us credit, I don't want to make us sound heroic, but we banged the drum together with some other people, and the national consortium of university libraries and they decided to buy a license and to parse it out to universities. We're a pretty big university, but we could not afford the package as it stood. That's for, super huge libraries and so forth. So they spread out the cost of it nationally and just got a national license. And then we got it. And life has been just wonderful ever since. Really, in terms of that, because I can just go to EBO and I can search things out. And I want to give our listeners an example of, it's not pedestrian, it's just an example of what a Shakespearean might find, right? So David McGuinness at Melbourne does work on lost plays and so forth. He's also a Shakespearean, but he put a little article, I think it was in a university publication, about wild goose chase and how the OED locates the first use of the term wild goose chase in, I think, Romeo and Juliet. I may be wrong about that. I think it's Romeo and Juliet, but wild goose chase, and there it is, Shakespeare first use. And there are all these things in the OED about Shakespeare first using it. And he did a simple EBO search, and he goes, no, you know, this was a pretty well-known concept. And he wrote a little article about other people who had used versions of wild goose chase and so forth. And I think put it in a university publication, and it was picked up locally by the press, and it went viral. The interest in that Shakespeare didn't really come up with a lot of terms and so forth. And I wrote him during the time, and he said, Tom, I didn't expect this, you know, just all of this, you know, media attention and so forth. But there are those kinds of things out there that can be discovered. And the more I look into it, for instance, with EBO, I can say, okay, there's an art in making stuff up, but the art in Shakespeare is bringing those proverbial phrases into, bringing popular culture and populating his text, or we say seasoning his text with these familiar terms and things that would really draw people in who lived at that time. You sort of had to be there, but a lot of us are very, very interested in bringing that back up and saying this is the wider scope of the culture that people were living in, you know, references to nature and things
and the plague
in the play, in the city of London, why there is a reference, why Friar John, I believe in Romeo and Juliet, cannot get the letter to Romeo because he's locked up in a plague house.
Because he's being quarantined because they suspect he has the plague, but probably he didn't, because he probably wouldn't have survived. But he's quarantined. The public health officers nail him into a house.
And until this last year, I thought that's the most ridiculous plot device in the world, that the guy was grabbed and put into a house and locked in. And that's why, nope, I understand now.
Actually, yes, that was what happened in Plagues Before Zoom.
Yes.
It wouldn't have been such a good play if there'd been that much social media in it.
Well, there were a few images from Wuhan where the Chinese government, you know, was very strict at the very beginning, and people were just, you know, in their houses there, you know,
yes.
And go ahead. I'm sorry.
So no, absolutely. And Shakespeare, like every other artist, is part of a much larger society. And one of his, we talked earlier about him borrowing stories. Of course, he borrowed language, was really playful with it, you know, apparently himself. So people who know much more about it than me, tell us. Fantastically creative, but that's one of the joys of being an artist, is that you do take influences from everywhere, consciously and unconsciously. But you also mentioned the OED, and I know this is not what was it, David McGuinness, did you say? I know it's not what he meant, any criticism of the OED, but it's us who put it on a pedestal. Our wonderful friends and colleagues who work there. It's just the other side of Oxford, and I know some of them well. It's this amazing project. It was an early citizen research project where people, including some people in prisons who had a lot of time, were part of their reading program and would read books and then and find that way about earliest usages or last usages of words. And it's been this huge sort of crowdsourced effort, as well as professional effort, obviously of the lexicographers who live there. They make heavy use of EBO, and it was one of those minor triumphs in the office where we used to work all together, when one of us would find a word and think, that doesn't sit, that strikes me as odd, this is earlier than I thought that word was used, and would look it up and find indeed it is earlier. But the OED, the people who work there, only had what was available to them at the time, and now of course they're making use of the same digital technologies that the rest of us are, so they're discovering things all the time and updating their records accordingly. But you only find where you look. It's like archaeology, you don't know what you haven't surveyed and what you haven't dug. and because people, because Shakespeare has dominated everything, Shakespeareana and bardolatry and, all of the things that we were talking about earlier, he also dominates the dictionary. It's not yes, they weren't trying to inscribe it in stone, this is the case, but this is the best of our knowledge now. And that's where you also see the interplay, I think, between that and the scientific method. Science, when I was at school, was the really boring bit, because it was just stuff. They told you facts and you'd learn a fact and then you knew a fact, but it had no relevance to anything. And I was embarrassingly old when I realized that science also is about chipping away at the edge of knowledge. It's enormously exciting. It's full of personalities and individual and group efforts and brilliance and mistakes and happy accidents, which is all the stuff that I loved in the humanities subjects. But we're all just people chipping away at the edge, and I love the fact that the OED is the Oxford English Dictionary is a living object.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me pay homage to the OED for this. For people who are outside our world, the Oxford English Dictionary, it is a monument. It is a monument, and it is. I go to it all the time to check out meanings of words, and I trust it. And I mean, no criticism for the hardworking staff there, all the way through from its early beginnings. It's miraculous. It really is a miraculous accomplishment, and it's the final word on most things. So many, even my students will say, well, this word defined by the OED is this. End of conversation. You cite the OED and that's it. So I don't mean to be irreverent in the least when it comes to the OED. It has helped all of us all the way through. But it is heavy on Shakespeare. And I think that goes back to its early beginnings, early formations, because those are the texts they had. And now we have a lot more search capability. And of course, that's feeding into the OED. I'm trying to think of the word that most recently I checked the etymology of. I was doing an article on Midsummer Night's Dream, and there's so much. And I was looking at the records of the Office of the Rebels that have been fortunately put into print, and reading them. And as you're talking about with the Chancery records, you'll find out that it's an education in learning how to read the records. You can't walk in with your knowledge of what happened, your knowledge of courts, and you can't walk in with your knowledge of drama or anything and read these records, because there are so many things that existed in the 16th century that we don't have now, or they're called by another name. And I had to figure out, I'm saying, why are they carrying so much coal in? They seem to be carrying all this coal. I finally figured out because it's cold. They need heat. They need to stay warm, and the learning experience of going through this record. So that for the OED. But I think that you said something interesting about your personal life, and it happened to me too. When I was in regular school before college, I felt very early on that I was not built for the sciences. And I think I'm mostly to blame. Even as a young boy, I should have been a little bit more disciplined in classes that would have led me that way, a mathematics class or early efforts by teachers to get little Tommy Dabbs to move in a certain direction. But my first, I just knew that I was going to have to go into either a social science or humanities direction. But the difference is, and I do want to talk about this difference because the show is about education. In the States, you can take all the time you want. You go to college and then you decide a major. And there are those few students who get there. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to law school after college, or I'm going to be a doctor, because if I'm not a doctor, then I'll be thrown out of my family and into the ocean or something like that. I knew guys like that. And then there were the rest of us who just wanted to be able to do something that we liked, right? But in the UK, you do. I think you sat for O and A levels. Is that right? In what would be the?
It was GCSEs by the time I was there, general
Okay, so
certificate
they
of
made that kind of.
secondary education. It used to be ordinary level, and then
Yeah,
the A, the
they made the
advanced. Yeah.
change. Yeah, but you still had to specialize and qualify, right? In fields when you're what, 16 years old or.
Yes, and was dropping subjects from the age of 12, I think. You
Yeah,
had to choose between foreign languages. You could only take two forward. You could drop Latin. I didn't.
yeah.
My mother was the Latin teacher.
Oh,
But I'm so glad I didn't. I wouldn't have dropped it anyway. And you had to choose between the more creative subjects as well. So you could only do two, I think, of art and home economics and textiles and something else I can't remember now. But yes, you start dropping subjects very early on
yeah.
in the UK. I believe, and this is not my area of expertise at all, but I believe efforts have been made to take more subjects forward now into the final 2 years of school, so between 16 and 18. But
Yeah.
yes, still we specialise, I think, much earlier than I believe happens in the States, for example, or in other countries around the world.
Well, did you know at that time that you were going to go into a humanities area? Was it abundantly clear to you, or?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I've always loved people and stories, and the people through the stories and the stories through the people, and that's why I enjoyed learning other languages, because you learn more about other people's cultures and how to communicate. So yes, I think I did, but there was another strand as well. No one will ever write a biography of me. I very much hope. There's not much to say. But if one were going to, you could draw a line back and say my mother was a Latin teacher who is passionate about music and literature, and my father's a software engineer. And looking at what I do now, you think, oh, yes, well, that was obvious. But it's not what it felt like at all. I was lucky enough to be able to follow my interests, and which is why I ended up doing studying literature and language at university. And yes, I think it was probably quite evident I was always going to go that way. And also, looking back, quite evident that I'd take the historical approach, as you were saying that you'd done as well, wanting always to situate it in its literature, in its broader society. But no, apart from the fact that what I do now, or the approaches that I take now, weren't available when I was younger. So I think if you want to become a doctor or a lawyer, there are things that you can see and imagine perhaps becoming, if you're fortunate. But what I have done hasn't existed. So it's just been a succession of happy accidents, largely due to saying yes a lot and meeting amazing people, brilliant people who've opened my eyes to so many possibilities. And I'm so lucky to have a job now that does exactly that. Every day we're working with new ideas and brilliant people doing brilliant things and making new discoveries because of it. And that's what gets me up in the morning. Well, that and the brilliant, it's the brilliant people I continue to work with.
Yeah, I'm glad the scientists loved science and do it. And I'm glad that the computer engineers, the mechanical engineers who are so brilliant are there and they do what they do. And I want to also, along with the OED, thank them, because I don't have that kind of, I don't have that kind of, I don't know if it's mind or I'm not as driven in that direction. Whereas other directions, uh, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back to graduate school for 5 years. I was a little bit, to finish a PhD or whatnot. And I arrived and I was there, I was broke. And we had there was a talk by this gentleman. I think he was at the University of Edinburgh, but he talked about Shakespeare and it was a wonderful talk. I can't remember his name. I'm sure he's long gone now. He was very old then. And we adjourned to the faculty lounge and there was free there, there was an open bar. You know, there was back in those days, you can have a beer or have a drink, and there was some food out, and we're talking. And I made a friend there who's become a lifelong friend. And I looked around the room, and there were a couple of famous scholars in there, and people, you know, the students and stuff. And I thought at that time, I'm home. I'm home. This is it. This is all I ever want to do. I just hope I can pay my rent. So, um, but you could do that. You ended up at the Bodleian, and you were there. And I think I'm getting it right when I said that you became the head of digital scholarship. Is that the right title? I think the at the
Yeah, head of
Bodleian,
the Centre for
head of the
Digital
Center for
Scholarship.
Digital Scholarship, where
Yeah.
I got to visit you a couple of times, and you gave me some inside looks of the Weston Wing and so forth, which was just delightful. And thank you. And
A pleasure.
so, uh, uh, and then you moved to the National Archives in the UK, where you are now. And so I'm looking into where we're going here. Um, the Yeah, we talked about EBO, TEI, the Text Encoding Initiative, which is still very much part. I wanted to mention my friend and colleague Kiyonori Nagasaki, whom you know, and you were
Yes.
talking
So,
about manuscripts, and that triggered me to think he's working with Buddhist manuscripts, of course,
yeah.
and search capability, which is, you know, extremely high end. uh, that's making an extremely high end demand on a machine to read, because not, you know, the differences between the letters of one scribe to another scribe, and how detailed he has to be if they're trying to train a machine to see a letter or word, you know, from manuscript to manuscript. But I suppose they're getting there. But then also the text encoding initiative, and you've been very involved with that over the years. And how is that going? Are you? I know you're on the board of all of these things. There's so much stuff to talk about. But let's
Well,
talk about TEI. Yeah.
so TEI, the Text Encoding Initiative, is this amazing group of people, and we use the same term for several aspects of it, but it's a community that started in 1987, I think, a really long time ago,
Yes.
where people were thinking that, you know, all of this computer stuff could really help us in looking at texts. So finding ways to encode texts using the same system so that ultimately they could speak across. And we mark texts up both so they're computer readable. And a really obvious example would be in a letter. You can mark up the address of the person who sent it and where it's going to, and the salutation, as in "Dear Tom," and your name, of course, and so on. And then you can mark up things within a text. So if I'm talking about, I don't know, health or the weather or animals, whatever is in there, you can mark it up in a way that's computer readable. But also because it uses XML, which is quite a extensible markup language, so it's quite a human friendly way of reading as well. And it's a way of making explicit in the text to machines and to people your interpretation of it. And I love it. One of the reasons I love reading books is that you feel that you're in a relationship with the characters in the book. And another is that, particularly for things that have been studied a lot, like, you know, like Shakespeare, for example, is that you're also in conversation with centuries worth of editors who've all brought their own interpretations to it. And the wonderful thing about the Text Encoding Initiative is that you can have these conversations in a way which is, you know, both readable by computers, and so they can render them so they can make it understandable in sort of easy ways at scale. And you can continue those conversations with other scholars. So yes, it's a group of people. It's guidelines for how to do it yourself if you're marking up text, if you're editing text yourself, and it's the system itself, and they're all called the TEI. And yes, I think actually last month, thank you for reminding me, I should update that. I ended my last term. I've served 3 terms on their board of directors, which is a voluntary position, but just keeping the consortium ticking over, and enabling the really important work of bringing the community together once a year, though it didn't happen this year, and most importantly, really supporting the technical council who do all the technical work, because it's a community. So it's so when you need a way of describing something that hasn't been described before, then you ask the technical council and they will add what we call a tag, but they'll add a new way, they'll add a new feature for you. And it's community driven, and it started with people who were studying manuscripts from the Western tradition, and now is used all over the world, Kiyanori Nagasaki being just one example of someone using it in, as you say, in Buddhist texts. But people are using it all over the world, and you can use it to describe any sort of text, not just manuscripts. So emails included, or things that are inscribed on stone. And it's developed and continues to develop by the community that uses it, almost exclusively by volunteer effort.
Yeah. Well, for our non-digital listeners, TEI, when you look at a web page, for instance, and or you're trying to read, let's say, a literary work online, and there's a lot that is behind the presentation of that work. There's an enormous amount of code behind it that frames its presentation. And that also, with markup and tagging and so forth, make it catalogable and searchable and shareable in that way that you can go from one text to the other. And this, we can't begin to explain the whole thing in meta languages and that sort of thing. But the fact is that no one just types. You can't just type a sonnet onto a page and throw it up, onto let's say a Word file, and throw it up on the web and have anything like that. This is a whole universe of interconnectivity, I think, between text in the best case, when you get beyond just the presentation, just the way it looks, and the relationship that you can have with it on a online, on a computer. And that's just wonderful work. I am happy to know people like you. You also are you're on advisory boards. You're at the Rylands Library in Manchester, and there's a Japanese connection there too. And I don't think it doesn't belong to Shakespeare. It belongs to there's the Japan Foundation and the Sasakawa Foundation, and it is concerning the collection of Japanese Edo era maps, Tokunaga era. And so, just so you know, when you're talking to your Rylands peeps, that there is a Japanese connection there with concerning maps in particular.
Oh, thank you. That's it's a fantastic group there. It's a research institute based at the John Rylands Library, which is the special collections part of the University of Manchester Library. It's led by Hannah Barker, who's a social historian. And it's another fantastic group of people who come together around the collections. It brings together the people who work in the library and the scholars, some of them visiting and some of them based at Manchester, to do fantastic things, often digitally as well. So more people who are interested in digital approaches to the texts that we work with. It's a wonderful group. It's an honor to be on their advisory board. Yeah,
wonderful collection too. You're with the Quill out of Oxford. Yeah, which is another very interesting group.
Yes, led by Nicholas Cole. That was software that he developed to look at scale at the processes that negotiate a text. So that the text that he started on was the American Constitution. He's been quite busy recently, and but also it looks at all sorts. It can look at any negotiation. It's a way of tracking and then visualizing the debates that go into agreeing a text. So he's also worked on the Declaration of Human Rights, for example, as well as other constitutions.
Doing American things over there. Okay, that's wonderful. And the Royal Historical, what is it, Royal Historical Society, or is it?
Yeah, the Royal Historical Society have a subcommittee that's led by Jane Winters, who's a professor of digital humanities at the School of Advanced Study in London, University of London. And it's a subcommittee that looks at and advises on digital approaches to history, which of course is right up my street.
Wow. That's just so exciting. It really is exciting. And I feel now, after talking to you, I'm sorry, it's wonderful to talk to you, but I'm now feeling a little bit more in exile. I want to get over there to that island you live on and visit first and foremost the National Archives. And it's absolutely, I'm a complete reprobate for not having used the collection, or at least visited and looked around before. But I've had, when we go to England, usually we have a very distinct sense of purpose. It's there for a conference. You have so much time there. And if you get some time off, you want to hire a car and run off and look at something interesting, and take a little bit of a holiday. And so next time I get there, that's going to be first. But some of these other places
You would be
also.
more than welcome.
Well, yeah, I'm just going to show up there and say, hello, Pip. And you're going to go, oh, no, that guy again. I hope he hadn't been drinking white wine. So I'm going to repeat, though, that the work that you do, the digital development crosses many, many fields, and even just the field of public interest. There's an enormous public interest, well beyond academia, in the kinds of holdings that you have. There's just so many treasures there, and how much the work that you have done through the work with EBO and other area TEI and so forth have benefited Shakespearean studies and individuals who may not know how much they have been benefited by your work, and of course the work of many other people. Now, I go to Barcelona a good bit. My wife spent my wife's children are there and so forth. So and I have a great love of that town, as you might imagine, and so last year I was fortunate enough to be on sabbatical and spend a lot of time there before the pandemic. But I remember years ago going there's a little more of a hill kind of mountain called Montjuic in town, where you can go up and get a look of the whole city and so forth. And there's a fort up there. And I remember looking out over the port of Barcelona and seeing this enormous cruise ship coming in, as they do from Italy and all over. And it just struck me. I said, who made that thing? Who made that thing? How do you make one of these things? And I think the question came to mind because I was thinking about how forbiddingly large some of the projects that you get involved with, that I've wanted to be involved and have been involved with. And we get into it and go, oh my goodness, we need an entire legion of people to get this done, or lots and lots of time. But the answer that came to my mind looking at that ship is, who made that? A lot of people made that.
That's a lovely analogy, and absolutely a lot of people over a lot of time, over centuries in many cases, have put together these collections. And one of the things that I love about digital is that even more people now can get involved. And one of the projects that we're working on is called Engaging Crowds, and it's looking at crowdsourcing, at citizen research, at volunteers donating their time to these projects to find out more about records in our case, but about finding out more knowledge in all areas. We're working with colleagues at Zooniverse, which is a huge crowdsourcing platform, but the Oxford English Dictionary, as mentioned earlier, is based on crowdsourcing. People have always been enormously generous with their time and with their expertise, inside and outside universities and formal organizations like archives and libraries. And it's understanding how we can make those projects more pleasurable for them, and get what the information that we need out so that we can share it back with more people is is still something we're keenly interested in. And on the flip side of that would be automation, bringing in digital methods. So getting the computers to do all the things that they can do. You were talking about Kiyonori Nagasaki and his computer vision, reading, working towards reading Buddhist texts. We have a project led by my colleague Laura Angelova, looking at, working with colleagues at the University of Surrey, looking at computer vision to search by image. So not using it this time to read text or make sense of text, but as a new way into collections, which are very hard to get into if you're not a super specialist and know all the language and they've been brilliantly catalogued. So I think it's that's what this moment is about for me, that our digital technology is expanding so vastly, but also the people who will benefit from it and the people who feed into it, and finding ways to bring those two together is hugely exciting and a big challenge for all of us.
It really, really is. Now, I would like you, after we finish, I would like you to stay for a moment because I
Sure.
wanted to debrief with you just a bit. But I wanted to thank you again from the bottom of my heart for spending your, now, wait a second, this is Wednesday evening. This is your Wednesday morning. So you're in the middle of a work week, and you were gracious enough to take time off from the important work that you're doing to talk with us. And I wanted to assure you that I will make sure that my Japanese colleagues in the Shakespeare Society and what's called the Eibun Gakkai, the Literary Society of Japan, and other people in the digital humanities community in Japan can see you virtually. And what we're going to do is, if we beg you, once it's possible, will you come back and see us again here in Tokyo and elsewhere in Japan? Would you be able to find a way to Japan once you're able to?
Tom, it would be an honor. I've been lucky enough to visit Japan a couple of times and seen you and colleagues there and learn more about the fantastic work you're doing. It would be wonderful to bring our work to share it with you. Thank you.
You're welcome. This is a substitute for a grant that I got to do a symposium. And you were on the short list of people I wanted to get here because I wanted digital people, the digital humanities people who work in archives and libraries, like Eric. I spoke with Eric Johnson, and I wanted scholars, and I wanted actors like Ben, and I wanted them to combine them with some of my colleagues here in Japan, who are, unlike me, actually Japanese, and grew up here and have a very wonderful, interesting perspective, many perspectives on Shakespeare and so forth, and have a little symposium to talk about the things that we've talked about here, and also to talk about our lives and to get to know each other. So that's why we have included all those things. But again, thank you so very much. It's just been wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for the invitation, Tom, and what a lovely way to spend a Wednesday morning. Thank you for your time. But yes, it's wonderful to see you, and thank you very much.
Okay, and you guys take care over there, and we will try to
you
here
too.
too. Bye-bye.
Bye.